Good afternoon, and welcome to our first Ren event of 2021. My name is Michael Otten, and I'm a co-founder of Reform Elections Now, along with a few other people that are on this call, which originated as a nonpartisan association of business and law school alumni. We were initially motivated by a thesis of business executive Catherine Gale and Harvard professor Michael Porter, that the current politics industry is a duopoly, with negative impacts affecting American business competitiveness. They identified election processes as a major part of the problem, disincenting constructive government action. Our team has been working for 3 years to understand and educate ourselves and others as to how to include civic engagement as part of our personal responsibilities. We welcome any of you to contact us after today's call if you wish to participate more directly in our activities. We do not fundraise or require more than an intellectual involvement with our work. The high turnout for last year's election reflects both an interest and a concern for how our government functions, with many questioning the fairness of both the process and its results. This afternoon, we will focus on some of the causes of the lack of trust in our elections. But more importantly, we will suggest ways to increase future confidence in the fairness of the results. Given that there are over 10,000 variations in election administration across our country, there is plenty of room for improvement. But there are also many examples of best practice and excellence. Please also join us in future months as we explore ways to improve election processes and thereby make our government work better for all the people. You can already pencil in on your calendar our next event, which is at 5:30 p.m. on March 3rd, with New York City's new implementation of ranked choice voting as the topic. New York City has 4 city council special elections starting with early voting on January 23rd and culminating with primaries in June for the mayor, controller, public advocate, and borough presidents. Our panel on March 3rd will include Sue Lerner, who's Executive Director, Common Cause New York, Amy Loprest, Executive Director of New York City's Campaign Finance Board, and Rebecca Kaplan, City Council Member at Large, who came in second under ranked choice voting in the race for Oakland, California mayor in 2014. And now we can move to the substance of this evening's program: how to change election rules so voters trust the results. Our Reform Elections Now team must acknowledge and very much appreciates the communication skills and knowledge that Peter Cyrus, our Director of Research, has brought to the complex subject of elections. He has a long history of business and community partnerships. He has published popular international business texts, as well as at least one novel dealing with political and business transformation in China. Peter hates long introductions, so I now turn the meeting over to him.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, so today's topic is breaking the partisan gridlock, how to change election rules so voters trust the results. Now, Americans don't trust the honesty of their election. When the Gallup poll asked, do you have confidence in the honesty of the elections? For no answers, we finished 30th. We beat Chile and Mexico. And for yes, we tied with Lithuania. Very impressive. Then in a poll that asked, do you trust the counting of votes? We didn't do that well. We ranked 26th out of 27. We didn't quite catch Cyprus and Estonia in trust in vote counting. We did, however, beat Italy. That was a good news. Okay. Now, it isn't that this is a sudden thing. Americans haven't trusted their elections for decades. I don't know where these little squiggly lines came from. But as you see, according to a Gallup poll, pretty much all the way back since 2006 here, where there's not a lot of trust. And here's an interesting one. In 2018, the University of Virginia asked, if American elections were fair and open. The Democrats disagreed. 52% of the Democrats said, no, they're not fair and open. The Republicans thought the elections were fair and open. Okay, so that was 2018. By 2000, sorry, but there's a missing slide. I apologize. By 2020, 71% of the Republicans thought that the elections were not free and open and fair, and 41% of the independents. So pretty much nobody is trusting the elections. And I apologize for the missing slide. In 3 of the last 6 presidential elections, 60% or less thought the elections were free and fair. Now, we now may think that 2020 was an aberration, but according to Statista, 2000 and 2016 had even lower levels of trust. In fact, many Americans think that 3 out of the last presidential elections were stolen. So what I'd like to do is, in the next few slides, we're going to look at these elections. And we'll have a vote at various times. And we ask you to suspend your partisanship and look only at the data and decide whether the results were correct. So let's start with 2000. Gore won the popular vote by a little over 500,000, with data receiving 2.7%. And Bush won the Electoral College 271 to 267. Now, Bush won Florida by 537 votes, and there were 60,000 undervotes, meaning the voter had not punched through, and 110,000 overvotes. That means they punched through and wrote in a name. After the election, the National Opinion Research Center of the University of Chicago analyzed all these votes and concluded that under various counting systems, Gore would have won by 60 votes to 171 votes. And by winning Florida, Gore would have won the Electoral College. Now, the Gallup took a poll and asked after the election if a accurate recount in Florida was possible. 79% of all adults, including 85% of Bush supporters and 73% of Gore supporters, said it was not possible. In other words, the 2000 election was settled by a count that no one believed. And if no one believed the count, and if the recount of NORC would have elected Gore, was Gore robbed in this election? Okay, so we're going to vote, and you have 3 choices: Bush, Gore, or I'm not, or no opinion.
Okay, we'll end the voting in about 5 seconds.
Well, so the winner, George Bush, gets 18% of our poll. Okay, so let's go to the next election. Sorry, I'm trying to close out the poll here. Sorry, I missed an election, so bear with me. Okay, the next election is 2016. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 2.9 million votes. Trump won the Electoral College 304 to 227. If Trump won Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania by 77,744 votes. If he had lost these states, Clinton would have won the Electoral College. Now, there were some factors that enabled Trump to win these states. They included revoking registrations. Michigan and Pennsylvania removed 400,000 and 855,000 voters from the rolls. There was a new voter ID law in Wisconsin, which removed 300,000 people did not have a satisfactory voter ID, even though the state promised to give everybody a free voter ID. And it was the lowest turnout in 3 decades. And the Republican Attorney General stated that it was the voter ID laws that, maybe bragged, that it was the voter ID laws that enabled Trump to win in Wisconsin. Interestingly, Michigan and Pennsylvania, which did not have voter ID laws, also blocked people from voting without IDs. It was especially tough in all 3 states for out-of-state college students who were not put on the voter rolls, even though they were registered. You had big machine breakdowns in Detroit and Philadelphia, and long lines in all minority districts limiting voting. And in addition to those, in the 3 states, you had 38,000 rejected votes, including 27,000 of those from Pennsylvania. So in Wisconsin, Trump won with a margin of 22,000 votes. We estimate there were 86,000 eliminated votes. In Michigan, he won with a margin of 10,000 votes. We estimate 98,500 eliminated votes. And Pennsylvania won by 44,000. We estimate 170,171 eliminated votes. And I can give you a full accounting of that. I just don't want to take the whole presentation up on it. But without the issues of removal of voter registration, voter IDs, machine breakdowns, registration of college students, long lines, and rejected votes, Clinton could have won these states. So if these voting issues had not existed, who would have won the presidential election? We're going to take another vote, and your choice is Clinton, Trump, or no opinion.
Hey, just a few more seconds. Okay, I'm ending the poll.
Okay, so that's
Here are the results.
25% for the winner. So 75% are not trusting that election. Okay. Now we come to the 2020 election, which I'm told, can we take the poll down, Herb?
Sure.
Okay. The 2020 election, which was between, I think, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. So Biden had a plurality of 7 million votes, and he won the Electoral College 306 to 232. However, if 41,596 votes had changed in Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin, the Electoral College would have been tied, and Trump would likely have won in the House of Representatives, where each state gets 1 vote for president, and more states are under Republican control. Now, Trump's argument for winning is that illegal mail-in votes swayed the election to Biden. As he tweeted, Dominion voting systems deleted 2.7 million Trump votes nationwide, and 221,000 Pennsylvania votes had been switched from President Trump to Biden, and the capitals are Trump's, not mine. Trump also suggested that many votes were cast by dead people. While there's no evidence that many people voted illegally, it would be useful to consider why Trump believed the election had been stolen. Now, we're going to take a look at the mail-in votes. According to Ballotpedia, the average state rejected 1.6% of mail-in votes in 2016 and 2.45 in 2018. But in 2020, experts believed that rejections would be much higher. According to a report by 538 on October 13th, 2020, quote, "This year rejection rates could be much higher because so many people are voting by mail for the first time and may not know the rules. Voters without experience voting by mail are up to 3 times more likely to have their ballots rejected." So what happened? Instead of increasing, the percentage of rejected votes declined dramatically. Now, only a few states have reported their rejected votes, but those who have showed a rejection rate of 1.01 compared to 2.93 in 2018 and 1.55 in 2016. But I want to take a look now at Georgia, which is obviously was the center of political controversy. Georgia in 2016 rejected 6.42% of mail-in votes. In 2020, it rejected 0.35. In the primary, it went from 17.8% rejected to 0.9% rejected. So in other words, Georgia improved its rejection rate by like 95%. Now, I'm not saying that anything funny happened. I'm just showing the numbers. However, in 2020, Democrats voted by mail at more than twice the rate of Republicans. If the percentage of rejected votes had remained the same as in 2016, and most people expected it to rise, Trump would have won Georgia and Pennsylvania. And while no rejection rates have been submitted from Wisconsin and Arizona, given the pattern from other states, he probably would have won those as well. This would have given Trump 290 votes in the Electoral College. To believe Trump lost, you have to believe that between the time of the primaries and the general election, while dealing with the COVID pandemic and the largest increase in mail-in voting ever, election authorities and Americans suddenly learned how to deal with mail-in votes. Okay, let's take a vote on the 2020 election.
Okay, we'll close the voting in a couple of seconds. I'm going to close it now.
Sure. Yeah, I guess people, I couldn't convince people that all those votes in Georgia were stolen. You know. But what is interesting is that this group of that 12% didn't have an opinion, 8% thought Trump should have won. And in the previous two elections, this group voted for the Democrat in the previous two elections that were cited, where, to the best of my knowledge, Republicans won. Okay, close the poll out. I got to close. So if the U.S. ranks behind Estonia and Cyprus in terms of vote counting, and behind Latvia and Lithuania in terms of honesty of elections, if 6 in 10 Americans don't trust the honesty of the elections, and if a large part of Americans don't trust the results of 3 of the last 6 elections, and if this group doesn't trust the results of 2 of those 3 elections, the U.S. has a problem. And the question is, how do we fix it? Now, the problems with our election system can be divided into registration, voting systems, mail-in voting processing, reporting, auditing, and federal oversight. Registration is difficult. States do a poor job of maintaining their lists. Addresses are confused. There are loopholes. The voting systems are outmoded, making it difficult to vote. When people go to vote and they're not on the list, long lines are created, you get provisional votes. We already talked about the problems with mail-in votes. Processing and counting delays result in late reporting that can cause voters to question results. Most states report in-person votes first and then mail-in votes, leading to suspicions about results. States spend little on auditing their results, limiting their ability to resolve problems. And then we have federal oversight of elections. Now, you notice there's no like little bullet point under federal oversight of elections. And when we get to the end, you'll find out why. Come on, I'll tell you now. It's because the agency that's supposed to oversee elections for the federal government hasn't had a quorum for about 2 years, so they haven't been able to meet. That's why we can't give it a bullet point. We missed the quorum. Until these issues are resolved, we won't be able to increase confidence in our voting system. Okay, let's talk about registration. Voter registration is a chaotic hodgepodge and the Achilles heel of voting. When people go to get a driver's license, they go to the Motor Vehicle Bureau. When they pay taxes, they go to the IRS. When people go to register to vote, they can send in by mail, go to motor vehicle, go to armed services office, go to public assistance office, some other state agency, disability offices, or sign up on a piece of paper with an advocacy group. With all these entities submitting documents, it's little wonder that voter registration is chaotic and hodgepodge. But if you think voter registration is hodgepodge, you should see list maintenance. This is one of my favorites. States spend little time keeping their voter lists up to date. What they do is they send letters through the mail to a small number of voters, many of whom do not reply. So in 2018, according to the Election Administration Voting Survey for the 116th Congress, notices were sent to about 11% of registered voters. 11% of these, 1.8% of all voters responded. This number I love. 38% of the responses were marked invalid. How can somebody respond to a letter from the Board of Elections and get marked invalid? I have no clue. But what that means is that only 1.1% were marked valid. Now, those were in the good states. Now you have some other states not so good. New York with 13.9 million voters reported 16,980 valid confirmations. Of course, that was a lot better than New Jersey, which reported 0 valid confirmations. And Michigan, I think they won an award because of the great improvement in 2018 with 4.3 million voters. They got 119 valid confirmations. Now, before you criticize, in 2016, they only had 64 valid confirmations. So in 2 election cycles for 4.3 million voters, they had 183 valid confirmations. How do you maintain a list of 4.3 million people if only 183 confirm? I don't know. But the good news is that while they don't do a good job maintaining their lists, they do a wonderful job throwing voters off their lists. Now, in 2018, 17.3 million voters, 8.2% of the total, were removed from state voter lists. Some died, a few moved, some requested to deregister, but the largest group, you got it, were those who didn't return the notices they sent. I love this. Now, Indiana, Virginia, and Wisconsin remove voters at twice the national average. In Indiana, less than 1% of the people moved. I mean, you live in a state with Mike Pence, you don't want to move. And only 5.7% died. Most were removed because they didn't respond to their notices or for other reasons. In Wisconsin, which has been a very close swing state, more than 56% were removed for failure to return confirmation notices. Now, the question is this: is a failure to return a notice a good reason for removing a voter from the rolls? I just want to, for a second, mention felons. I mean, if you really want to see a problem. In 48 states, felons lose the right to vote when they're incarcerated. Okay, understand somebody shouldn't be able to vote from jail. And the right to vote is restored in only 18 states. And in most of these, felons have to re-register. Now, the Sentencing Project estimates that 5.2 million have been barred from voting because of felony convictions. And while in Florida passed a constitutional amendment that allowed felons to vote, but then the state legislature put up barriers like they have to pay court costs before they vote. Now, for those of you who think that I'm droning on about something irrelevant, had these barriers not been erected, more than 900,000 felons would have been eligible to vote. And just remember, Trump carried Florida by 300,000 votes. If they had let felons vote, very likely that Biden would have won Florida. But, while the Sentencing Project says it's 5.2 million, the actual numbers likely double or triple that because of the complex rules for re-registering felons. And many felons who go to vote are turned away because the poll workers don't understand the rules. Okay, back to voting problems. Now, one loophole that's actually pretty interesting is voting in multiple states. Because the states control the voting problem, people with multiple residents could be out-of-state college students, or it could be somebody with a winter home in New York and a summer home in New York and a winter home in Florida. When they attempt to vote in multiple states, there's no way to check it because the states don't talk to each other. In fact, right before the runoff election for Senate in Georgia, a Republican lawyer from Florida was on TV telling all of his friends to find an address in Georgia for 1 month so they could vote in the Senate runoff and then walk away from that address. While there's not a lot of evidence that people vote in more than one state, as long as many believe that they do, like college students being bused to vote, eliminating this uncertainty is very important. Now, we're going to make suggestions of 4 steps to fix the registration process. The first is simple. It's called automatic voter registration, or AVR. Anytime a citizen has direct interaction with the government, getting a driver's license, paying local taxes, collecting unemployment, they can automatically be registered to vote. If a non-citizen applies for a driver's license or pays taxes, the state knows that that person is not a citizen. They don't have to give that person a voting card. And there are significant penalties for non-citizens if they somehow sneak in. Now, there was a glitch in Illinois that resulted in 574 citizens being mistakenly registered, 16 cast votes. And besides that, we can't find much evidence of non-citizens being registered. Now, the point is this: almost everybody in this country deals with some form of government. Citizens should be automatically registered. Let them opt out if they don't want to vote. But if you have automatic registration, then you have a solid record of who is registered to vote. And just so you can see, 538 did a study of a bunch of states that had AVR registration. And as you can see, it made a very substantial difference in a lot of states. 2.3 million people in Georgia, 1.67 in California. These are a lot of people. Now, just so you know, while the increase in registration is very high, the turnout was not as high. And these people voted, if the average turnout was 62%, they were 47%, but they got registered and they had the opportunity to vote. 19 states in the District of Columbia are already running versions of such a system. We think it should be expanded. The second thing should be online registration. Now, this idea of having these paper lists and having to do checking by sending out notices. Has anybody ever gotten a notice from the IRS saying, We're doing IRS list maintenance. We want to see if you're still there. I don't think so. IRS knows where to find you. Board of Elections should be able to do the same. Well, one of the advantages of an online registry is if somebody moves, if a student goes to a different college, if somebody changes their name, they can go right online and change their registration. This gives you an up-to-date list and reduces the error with paperback systems. It saves paper-based systems. It saves a significant amount of money, increases accuracy, and reduces delays and congestion. The other thing it does is it makes it almost impossible for one person with multiple residents in one state to vote twice. Now, we also are recommending a national voter registry. The states are going to run their elections, but shouldn't the states have a way of checking whether somebody is voting in Florida and in New York? Shouldn't there be a way of checking whether somebody is registered in 7 different states, as some of these people are claiming? It'd be very easy if there was a national voter registry, if each state submitted their information to a national voter registry, and the national voter registry could report back to the states of these kind of instances. There is very little evidence that people vote in multiple states, but a national voter registry would provide extra security and give citizens greater confidence that abuses can be protected. And finally, we're suggesting voter IDs. Now, people think of voter IDs as a way of suppressing votes, but with AVR, once you register, in addition to getting your driver's license or whatever identification you're getting from the government, they should have an automatic voter ID card. This will eliminate complaints about non-citizens voting. And when a citizen goes to the poll or is voting by mail, they can scan the ID card or show the ID card, and this eliminates all the problems. So with AVR, people can register. With online registration, voter information will remain up to date. With a national registry, loophole will be closed. With universal voter ID cards, there will be fewer provisional ballots, shorter lines, and fewer election disputes. Now, the next problem is the 20th century or sometimes 18th century technology. Many voting systems use very old technology. Poll workers use paper. When you go into a polling booth, you're signing in paper. Well, it's good to have paper backup, but people are they're shuffling through books of paper looking for your name is crazy. Also, the machines are old. 45 states using voting machines in some venues that are no longer manufactured. How they get repaired, don't ask. And 40 states are using machines that are at least 10 years old. If machines break down, votes can be lost and voters can be turned away. 16 states use machines in various locations that don't have paper backups. So how can results be verified if machines break down are hacked and there's no paper backup? Trump contended that, hacking here, that Dominion voting machines were hacked and delivered votes to Biden. In 2016, the Clinton campaign accused the Russians of hacking to help elect Trump. Whatever you believe, hacking is a threat, and we don't have good systems for preventing it. So here are 4 steps to improve election technology. First, electronic poll books. It's like an app to replace paper books. When you go into Walmart, people have an app to tell you what's in stock. If you go into Costco, they have an app on a tablet. In the voting polls, not so much. So these electronic poll books will have full state voter information. This is going to shorten lines, provide correct information for people who go to the wrong polling place, and eliminate people trying to vote in multiple locations. They also can have independent redundancy to minimize the risk of hacking. And the government should provide funding for states to utilize these poll books. Now, states with support from the federal government should upgrade all voting systems. the government should invite technology companies to develop new systems for voting that could make that could make voting less expensive, more reliable, and more efficient. Look, voting to me is an app. It can be done on a computer, a printer, who knows? But we're using voting machines once every 2 years. Could there be better technology for this process? Sure, there could. And somehow, if all the states got together with the federal government and the technology companies, we probably could figure something out. But one thing is critical: all voting systems have to be equipped with paper backups in case of hacking or breakdown. We also think there should be a common national data format, which will make it more attractive for technology companies to fill the need for voting systems like the electronic poll books and enable seamless sharing of information between states. And finally, we think that there should be a national office for the prevention of election hacking. Look, someday, I can't tell you whether Dominion hacked or whether the Russians hacked in 2016, but I can tell you that some election is going to be hacked. And unless we're on top of it early, we're going to end up actually seriously screwed. Okay, just want to talk for a second about mail-in voting. The problems of mail-in voting, whether real or imagined, were related to this election. Now, states with all mail-in voting, like Oregon, Washington, Utah, Colorado, Hawaii, they had very little problems. States very experienced in mail-in voting, they had very little problems. Most of the problems occurred in states with relatively little experience in handling mail-in voting. Now, this is unfortunate because mail-in voting is less expensive. States with mail-in voting save 40% on the cost of elections. If people are going to vote by mail, you don't need as many poll places. You don't need as many voting machines. And it's more convenient and it eliminates problems and things like long lines. Now, with expanded in-person early voting and fewer restrictions on mail-in voting, we had the highest turnout since 1908. Now, Herb, who did you vote for in 1908?
I was sick that time. I couldn't make it.
Yeah, it was a tough election. So here are 5 practices to improve mail-in voting. 1, voters should vote before Election Day. This idea of getting your ballot in at 5 o'clock on Election Day and having it not postmarked is crazy. I dare say most people knew the day before Election Day whether they were going to vote for Biden or Trump. Secondly, drop boxes should be put in secure locations like police stations and government offices. That eliminates the risk of the Postal Service losing votes. Mail-in votes should be checked with state and national databases to ensure that no one is voting twice or that dead people and dogs are not voting. Now, you may notice dogs there. They actually arrested one woman who voted in the name of her dog. How the dog got registered, I don't know. Mail-in voters should not have the opportunity to change their mind and vote in person. The idea that you're going to vote by mail and then, turn around 2 days later and go in and vote in person is crazy, because it just adds to the level of confusion and mistrust. Vote once, that's enough. And voters should be given the opportunity to cure any rejected mail-in vote. Only 13 states allow people to cure. This means they don't like your signature, or you forgot, you sealed it with saliva instead of just pushing it closed. You should have a chance to fix that. Okay. So when states processing and counting, when states do not start processing and counting until the polls close, or as was the case in New York, 7 days after Election Day, Now, understand, we're watching on election night the results, and New York is not going to start counting for 1 week after that. So when processing and counting are delayed, it leads people to believe that something could be wrong. We talked already about curing mail-in votes. Now, what's interesting in the 2020 election, all the states with disputed results did not start counting until election day. And all but one did not start processing before election day. Now, there are only 2 reasons for waiting until election day to begin processing and counting. Concern that the vote totals will be prematurely released, impacting the election, and providing people who have voted by mail the chance to change their vote in person. Now, we can find no examples of major early releases of voting results. This is not Dixville Notch, New Hampshire. And since changing votes at best creates problems, these issues should not deter states from starting the processing and counting problem. Now, we have 2 recommendations. 1, processing and counting should begin when ballots arrive. States will be able to issue results in a timely manner if they start counting when the votes start processing and counting when the votes arrive. Secondly, and this may sound like a small irrelevant point, but there are overseas and military voters. 42% of these voters are military. And if you remember watching Georgia, it's only 5 more days till the military votes come in. If you're in Afghanistan or if you're in, Iraq, the mail service between, say, Kabul and New York is a little worse than the mail service, say, between Scarsdale and New York. And very often these elections these are the last votes to come in. So we are suggesting that to avoid these problems, overseas voters should be allowed to vote online. Okay, reporting. The biggest problem with the election came from the way states reported their votes. That's like Trump was the way states report votes is most states count their in-person vote first, then their rural votes, then their urban votes. So you look, except for Ohio. So then you looked on the TV and you saw, Trump is winning. Trump is winning Georgia. He's winning Pennsylvania. He's winning Michigan. And then in the middle of the night, all those, votes start coming in from Philadelphia. They start coming in. All the mail-in votes start coming in. And Trump says the election is rigged. Now, we have 2 suggestions here. First, we know that Steve Kornacki and these other people like their jobs, but there is no reason why a state can't delay reporting until it has a substantial number of votes. This will save all of us the agita of trying to analyze the 62 additional votes that just came in from Dalton, Georgia. Now, there's 2 more things that we're suggesting. One is post-election audits. An audit is not a recount. It's a review of the election system. It's same as a corporate audit. The purpose is to identify areas of weakness so they can be improved. Now, according to Verified Voting, 24 states have inadequate audit procedures and 14 states have audit procedures that need improvement. Only 1 state, New Mexico, rated excellent. And the benefits of an audit is they reveal recounts are necessary. They find the errors, whether accidental or intentional. They deter fraud. They provide continuous improvement in the conduct of election, and they promote public confidence in elections. So to promote greater confidence in elections and improve the process, all states should improve their post-election audit, except maybe New Mexico, and Congress should publish a review of the post-election audit for all citizens. Now, if you remember earlier, I mentioned the Federal Election Commission. The Federal Election Commission is an independent regulatory agency created by Congress in 1975 to administer and enforce the Federal Elections Campaign Act, including overseeing campaign funding limits and prohibitions. It has 6 members, no more than 3 of whom are from one party, and 4 votes are required for any proposal. Now, the FEC has been essential in overseeing campaign funding. There's only one problem, as I mentioned earlier. For much of the past 2 years, it's lacked a quorum. It's had only 3 members, which means it can't operate because the president, either because the president didn't nominate or the Senate did not approve the nomination. So I don't understand government that well, but I can understand the point of having an election commission if it can't operate. So we're recommending that the new president and the Congress should commit themselves to revitalize the FEC. So just to conclude now, the U.S. ranks behind most countries in trust in voting in elections. A large percent of Americans do not believe our elections are free and fair. Now, I know a lot of this stuff is wonky, but fixing this stuff is wonky. So to improve the level of trust in elections, we should improve the registration system by implementing AVR, online state registration, a national voter registry, and voter IDs. We should modernize voting technology, especially with electronic poll books and paper backup. We should improve mail-in voting systems and provide all voters with the opportunity to cure a rejected vote. We should process and count votes when they arrive so results can be reported in a timely manner. We should report votes, states should report votes at one time instead of dribbling out piecemeal returns so voters do not think someone is cheating. And we should provide stronger post-election audits to deter mistakes, improve the systems, and generate greater confidence in the results. Plus, goes without saying, we should, if we have a federal elections commission, we should have members. And we think we have to act now if we are going to build confidence before the next election. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Peter. This is Herb Kaplan. I'm also a member of the Reform Elections Now team. Thank you for another wonderful presentation, Peter. You know, I'm really glad to know that we're sort of in the class with Estonia, Cyprus, and Lithuania in voter trust and election integrity. That's really important to know. If any of you have questions, we have many people on this call, so I think the best way is to ask your question in the chat box, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. I've been monitoring the chat box, and I have a few questions that I'll start with, and those of you on the call can ask other questions. First question: mail-in voting is. And this is by one of our listeners, mail-in voting is much less verifiable. So therefore, with the increasing trend in mail-in voting, don't we need more oversight with mail-in voting?
Okay, so the question is, how is it less verifiable?
Yes.
And I can understand that people can think it's less verifiable. I saw, just wait one second. I saw a note from one of our core members, Harry, who's in California. The states that have experience in mail-in voting, that have major mail-in voting, have all sorts of, pretty simple rules, like you have to put your social security number down, and some states have all mail-in voting, and there's identification that you need when you submit it. So it's really, as we've said in previous presentations, they've had very little problem when they organize for mail-in voting. The ones that have the problem are the ones that sort of are doing it haphazardly.
Okay, thank you. By the way, I've seen at least one person ask if they can get a copy of the presentation. The answer is yes. If you go to our website, reformelectionsnow.org, we will have the PowerPoint presentation and a recording of this event up in about a day or two. So you can just go
Herb,
to our
the
website for that.
the presentation itself is already up. The recording will take a little longer.
Okay, thank you.
Jade took care of that.
The next question concerns online voting. And the question is, doesn't online voting invite hacking? There's no paper trail with online voting. And so is it more susceptible to hacking?
Yeah, you're talking, I assume they're talking about my recommendation that overseas voters and US military overseas, you know, I mean, you're talking about a very small number of people, okay? And if they're in a state like Georgia, if there are 7,000 people, these are going to be they're in a separate bin. If you see something, if there's not enough people to make a difference, and there are ways of controlling that. It's not like you're letting millions of people vote. You're just, as I say, it's mostly a courtesy for, if you were in the US Armed Forces, you're on a ship in the Persian Gulf, or you're stationed in Kabul, shouldn't you have a way to vote? And there are ways of controlling, those votes can all go to a US military center that can review them all. I mean, all these things are doable. And I'm not suggesting we have open voting, online voting for everybody. That would be very susceptible for hacking. But a small group of military people, I think we could handle.
Another question is my question. Some of the recommendations that you proposed will result in more people being allowed to vote. Won't there be some resistance from some quarters to counteract this? What we're saying is these are, I guess, rights of every citizen. Every citizen should have a right to vote, and we should do everything we can to facilitate that. Might there be some who don't see it that way?
Sure. Look,
The answer is yes.
there are clearly people who think that the Constitution was correct when it didn't. If you all remember the Constitution, the only people who could vote in the Constitution were white males who owned land, and women weren't allowed to vote. Needless to say, minorities weren't allowed to vote, and people who didn't own land were not allowed to vote. And I'm sure there are still, people who believe that. Our goal is to offer people their rights, but to assure everybody that no one is that we are that controls are being put in to avoid abuse. The argument that Donald Trump made in this election was, there were millions of dead people voting. We don't think dead people should have the right to vote, but we do think alive people should have the right to vote.
Thank you. There's another comment by Allegra Dangler talking about election security and the need for auditing. Auditing could lead to better security. What kind of audits are adequate to lead to a 100% hand count to confirm the machine count? I'm not sure that auditing, the objective of auditing is 100% recounting, if that was suggested. But the issue is they are adequate. What is the right amount of auditing that will do the job and give people confidence in the results?
You know, auditing is is an art, not a science. You know, you start out and you're spot checking when you're auditing, whether you're auditing a corporation or you're auditing elections, you're spot checking. And if you start to find errors, then you start to check more. And you know, I think I think that there's no right answer to that. I don't think you're gonna need to check every single vote, but you're gonna need a sample. You're gonna need to be able to sample precincts, different groups, and see. And if you start to come up using the example I gave in Illinois, if you come up with 17 or even 2 non-citizens who voted, then you know somewhere that those 17 people who voted did not come from, they were trying to cheat the system. They were people who didn't understand, and the system registered them to vote in error. And so all that I'm saying is, if you start to see problems, then you do a more aggressive audit.
Thank you.
Peter?
Yes.
Would it be possible? I'm a great believer in positive feedback. And I wondered if there's any possible way to get, you know, they're really 2 years apart, the national elections for Congress and for the presidency. And, you know, before those elections, well before, not, you know, the day before, but I mean, not, you know, maybe a month or so before, to send everybody who's voted, who's registered, a nice note saying, you know, you're registered, great, you're a great American, you're going to vote. We hope you'll vote. You know, where you're all set and you're all clean and you're all voted. And I mean, you're all registered and everything's all hunky dory. I mean, would that be technologically possible? And if so, would it be motivating to get more people out to vote? Because the other problem is we don't have very many people who vote compared to the percentage of their people.
That's correct. The question I keep asking is this, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the states send confirmation letters to people saying, oh, you're ready to go. Please check this and tell us you're happy. And 38% of the people who check this and tell the states they're happy then get marked invalid. You know, why? I suspect a lot of people have email. I suspect that rather than sending out letters, that you could cover 95% of the people and say, click here, you know, here, thank you for voting, click here. And then you could send letters to the rest. But it's because every state has different systems. It gets very complicated to standardize them.
Couldn't that be done though from a national standpoint, even if the states do have their own say?
The states are not going to give up their own rights.
No, it'd be in addition to that. All we're doing is saying that our federal registry contains your name, you're all set, and we hope you'll vote.
Once you get a federal registry, and in terms of if you asked me of all the things we suggested, even though we're suggesting the Federal Registry to help eliminate fraud, the hardest thing to accomplish of all the things on our list will be setting up a Federal Registry. Because as Ronald Reagan said, we're the government, have a nice day, or whatever it was. I mean, states, anytime you hear the word Federal Registry, there are a lot of states that don't want the federal government involved one way or another. So I think we're still away from getting that set up.
Peter, there was another question dealing with mail-in voting, I guess because of the trend in increasing number of mail-in, amount of mail-in voting. There's the issue of security and signature verification. And the person who raises this question suggested that there might be a lot of issues with signature verification. I mean, lack of signature verification. How do you respond to that?
Yep, absolutely. And that's why where there is an issue with signature verification, the states that are experienced in mail-in voting have a cure process. Now, that cure process may be that they contact the voter and say, hey, my sister lives in Oregon, which is an all mail-in state. And she had her signature turned down one year. They contacted her. She went to the polling place and, and gave them another signature. The fact is that it's perfectly reasonable. I have no idea what signature I used when I first registered to vote. If I decided to vote by mail, my signature, I'm sure, would be turned down. So signature verification is very important. And what's really important about signature verification is the cure. But now, before we get to the next question, I do want to ask a question. I want to go back to the slide we had about the 2020 election. In the primary in 2016, as we said, 17.8% of mail-in votes were rejected, mostly over signature verification. But somehow Georgia went from 17.8% in 2018 to 0.9% in 2020, because everybody suddenly learned how to sign in. All these things, and I'm not suggesting Georgia was a fraud. What I'm suggesting is, as people gain experience in this, they can work out the bugs. And if there is a cure process, it becomes that much easier.
Mike, I've gone through the chat box. I'm probably missed some. Have you seen any questions, Mike, that we haven't answered yet?
I think the best way to handle that is if anyone feels that they didn't have a question answered, please unmute yourself and ask the question. We have a very responsive.
Logistic matter here. For anybody who wants to do that, could you also have them maybe use the raise hand feature, and then you can call on them so that we aren't talking over each other?
Yep.
We have a very orderly group here, so it doesn't seem like it's going to be a problem. But certainly anyone should feel free to jump in.
Raise hands.
You can do that. You can just jump in since we're sort of toward the end.
This is Joe here. Has any of this actually been started? These recommendations, have they been started at any point, any state, any level?
Yeah, a lot of these in a lot of states, as we said, automatic voter registration is in a bunch of
Yeah,
states.
we do that in our state. We do automatic voter registration in Connecticut.
Yeah, okay. Some states, 19 states have started online registration. Most of these things that we've talked about today have started somewhere. None of these are just reform elections now imagination. there is, as I talked about the Federal Election Commission, it exists. It just doesn't have any members.
Well, they've been talking about restructuring it and making it less partisan as well, because it's ineffective when it's split the way it is. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, there are 10,000 different processes. It's also one of the protections of our system from hacking is the fact that they are so different from every community that it really, to have an effective job of hacking is quite a challenge. But we do have best practices in some places that we can hopefully share with communities that are not up to snuff. I think many of you who are in the New York area realize that New York is rated, I think, at least it's a little out of date, but it was 4 years ago, was rated number 49 out of 50 states in terms of election competence.
Yeah, it's moved up to 48.
Well, I think we've done better than that, Peter, but we'll wait till the next MIT study comes out.
But also, Peter, I was looking at an op-ed article in the New York Times back in November, and just reading just from that, it said a consortium of 30 states plus the District of Columbia already have formed the Election Registration Information Center to make it easier for states to share data for one of the purposes to keep track of people who might move from state to state. So I sense that things are happening around the country, and it's just, I guess it's only going to get better.
Yep.
And I would want to encourage everyone that's on this call that's interested in elections and complexity of elections. We have a call coming up on March 3rd, specifically involved with the ranked choice voting in New York City. And that will be an interesting exercise. Most of what you'll see in the press and elsewhere is either going to be very positive or very negative. What I hope we can present to you on March 3rd is a balanced view of the pros and some of the cons that exist with moving to ranked choice voting, which in some ways is more difficult to administer than the regular, but we do believe is a better system in terms of representing what the people's wishes are and getting the most effective government.
Herb, can you unmute the people who have their hands up?
I think they have to do that themselves.
Quick logistical question on that. How can we sign up to be on the list for the Zoom call for upcoming Zoom calls like the March 3rd one?
Go to our website and put your name in.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, I just noticed that Robin Nides raised her hand. Robin?
Hi, it's
his hand. I'm sorry. I took a 50% chance.
Totally fine.
Hey, my brother's name is Robin. You're in good company.
That's why I worked most of my career in England, where Robin is the guy. But it's all good.
Robin Hood.
No, but first of all, thank you so much for this presentation. It's really helpful and it's much needed. I have a couple questions, really. One is, why not use existing federal systems like the Social Security Administration or the IRS to immediately capture a bulk of, not all, but a bulk of those who can vote? So that's the first question. And the second question is really to go on from a prior question, is what access do you have in the federal system in terms of decision makers and being able to influence and implement what you're recommending?
Okay, the answer to your first question is absolutely. I mean, if you have, one of the reasons I kept mentioning the IRS and Social Security and other federal agencies is, I can't find a person in this country, whether legal or illegal, who doesn't have contact with some federal agency on something. And you really just have to, and now to your second question, which I'll tie in with the first, the real problem is getting the states to agree to be willing to use this information from the federal government and getting the states to agree to work with the federal government. I mean, there are, and I'm not blaming particular parties, but for example, there was a law passed in North Dakota a year ago, a year and a half ago, that said that in order to register to vote, you needed a street address. There's only one small problem with that, which is people on Native American reservations don't have street addresses. So what it was the legislature in North Dakota found some tricky way to deregister all the Native Americans who lived on a reservation. And the problem with, with the federal government and the states is a lot of states do not want a fair voting system. A lot of states, are happier that Native Americans don't get a chance to vote, or some other.
Yeah, I would also point out that there are some federal guardrails to try and protect privacy that prevent certain databases to be used for other than their intended original purposes. And that's something that needs to be managed around as well.
Next question is by Julia Nichols-Bryan. Julia?
Hi, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. The beginning of your presentation, you spoke of the lack of confidence in our elections, and I really think so much overhang remains after this last election with the steal the vote, and so many people who still believe that. Is there any effort nationally, some sort of commission or any bipartisan effort, those who challenged the electors and the Stacey Abrams, to work together on these? Because they seem nonpartisan, but in HR 1, that's just DOA. That's just seen as purely Democrat. Is there a bipartisan effort? Are leaders stepping up to this? Is there any chance of this sort of thing moving forward?
We haven't seen that. One of the things that was interesting is when and I'm really happy we tried it. When we took our poll, this group thought that this election was fair, but this group also thought that the elections of 2016 and 2000 were not fair. And I promise you, if Donald Trump had won, that you would have, had it won this election, you would have had the Democrats jumping up and down, screaming the election was stolen. And so the point, I think, in our view, is that it really is going to take nonpartisan people of goodwill to try to do some of these things so that, so that either side is not going to believe that elections are stolen. As I said, again, if you looked at the poll that was taken in 2018, Republicans were hunky-dory. They thought the elections were fair. It was the Democrats who thought they were stolen. It's the system itself that's broken.
Okay, I see one more hand raised. Justin?
Oh, yeah, I'm unmuted now. There we go. So to piggyback on that one, yes, system is broken. We all think that there are things that are not really as transparent as they should be, at the very least. The other point that I want to piggyback on that is someone had said, partisan views on this, right? HR 1 being a Democrat thing. And what I wanted to bring up was the concept of demographics, that if you give more people, you re-enable them, if you will, to exercise their right to vote, given the general leanings of the people who are possibly excluded, would that also change the balance of power and also end up producing a stronger form of partisanship? And so simply changing rights might not be enough. You mentioned on your call, you've got a call coming up in March on changing the voting system. I'm wondering what sort of traction you have in discussions with your colleagues on that being really the linchpin of the entire system, more than even the logistics.
Well, that's a very complicated question. We think that there needs to be a lot of changes in the voting system. But one thing I will point out when we talk about partisanship is that the Democrats are at a serious disadvantage in all layers of government. They're clearly at a disadvantage in the Senate and the Electoral College with small states, but you have states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, I'm going to miss a couple, North Carolina, Michigan, New Hampshire, Arizona, a number of others.
Okay, I found
So-
this.
Nevada, Georgia, and Florida.
Are they
where-
clearly in a disadvantage in the Senate and the Electoral College
Shut
with small
up.
states?
That's Siri. She didn't raise her hand. Where the Democrats won a plurality of the vote, but ended up with a minority of the seats because of gerrymandering. And I think the next big issue that we're going to have to look at on a partisan and nonpartisan basis, with the census coming this year, with the census from last year and redistricting coming this year, is going to be the impact of gerrymandering on the next 10 years of government.
I see a hand raised by Steve Kaiser, and we're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon. Steve Kaiser.
Yeah, this just seems like a really good time to get bipartisan efforts to actually reform our voting system totally. I mean, none of us could have imagined the Republicans being up in arms about the election being stolen. That seems to have been the bailiwick only of the Democrats the last 20 years. But we should take advantage of this opportunity to get with the Republicans and come up with a system that all sides agreed on really reflects the popular sentiment. So it's a good opportunity that I don't think we should miss.
I just like to say there are a number of things that are happening like this where you had the Democrats complaining that elections were stolen. Now you have the Republicans complaining. This is a good chance to get together. Another area which is similar that we didn't talk about, but is related, is campaign financing. In the past, it's always been the Democrats saying, let's limit the amount of money coming from, groups that the shady Citizens United groups. But in this election, the Democrats vastly outspent the Republicans. So now the Republicans are starting to think, well, gee, maybe we should limit spending. So I think we at Reform Elections Now think this is a good time to try to promote bipartisan solutions to some of our election problems.
This new evolved election system that we could theoretically come up with, what do the Republicans want to change that we stand in opposition to as far as changing the elections? Does anything come to mind for you, Peter, in your research?
I mean,
Republicans want that we don't want in new election systems?
Yeah, the Republicans, some Republicans, as I said before, think that women and minorities shouldn't have the right to vote.
Well, come on. I know underneath, maybe they do feel that way.
Okay, but
Up in public, nobody's going to say that any human being that's of age doesn't have the right to vote in this country.
correct. There is no reason why most of these suggestions should not go through, should not appeal to members of both parties.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it is now 6:50, and I'm just wondering
Justin Blank wants to speak yet, or
Justin, did you want to say something
This will be
important?
the last question or
Because I do
comment.
want to, I think we have to wrap it up. But Justin, what do you have to add?
Right. To piggyback on that campaign finance question, I haven't heard too many people proposing taxing the campaign contributions for the purpose of paying for audits and other oversight.
A excellent idea, Justin. Where are you located, Justin?
I am in Northern California,
Okay, just asking.
Sacramento area.
Got it.
Mike, do you want to wrap this up? And
Well, I think we've covered some good ground tonight, and I do agree with what Steve said as well as others that this is a timely thing. I'm glad that people are still interested and not just walking away from the 2020 election and saying, "Phew, it's over," because these things can happen again, and there are things we need to do to improve our processes. We're working on them. We'd certainly welcome others to join in and give us good suggestions. We'd also like to have you participate in any way when we actually get concrete proposals in front of one state or another. We're going to be coming back and saying, okay, here's where we need to put some pressure, because a lot of this needs to be done at the level of states, not just the federal level, or very rarely the federal level. So we thank you for coming. We do think that March 3rd, even though it's focused on only New York City ranked choice voting is one of the most interesting political innovations, I think, that we're really seeing a lot of energy going into over the last couple of years. Some of it has worked out well, as the case of Alaska, which has got a top 4 ranked choice voting process, and not so well in places like Massachusetts, which just lost very narrowly, passing a ranked choice voting provision in their state. So New York City is going to be the largest implementer of ranked choice voting. There will be lots of people taking shots at it. We'd like to give as good a full story as we can on March 3rd. So put that on your calendar. We'll try to get the message out to everyone that's a subscriber on our website. Should be getting an invitation when it's ready. Thank you all for coming. And thank you, Peter, for putting together a very interesting evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
take care, everybody.